Okay, today we're going to be talking about speed tree vegetation. We're going to be creating something similar to this, or maybe something totally different. I'm going to be focusing on some bushes. I am using speed tree version 8.3.1. We're going to be starting from scratch with these. These bushes here, the leaves are moving a little bit too much. So you probably want to tone that down, but I'm also going to be focusing on level of detail. Looking at this guy's got about 20,000 polygons, and then on the lowest level of detail 1.7. And then if you take that to the, so when I export this, I also include LOD billboards. That will be about 30, that's about 36 vertices, not triangles. So it's really, really efficient. This is kind of what I'm going for my poly count. This is not, I wouldn't consider this a hero, you know, it's not like a super high poly bush. You can really push this depending on which, I'm specifically targeting my rig, which is a GTX 1080. And I'm aiming for about 60 frames per second on 1080p. With the world populated with vegetation, it's not going to be super lush, but there will be a considerable amount of vegetation in the and you'll see them. They also have a very high draw distance as well. We're not going to be doing that in this video. We'll be doing that in another video, placing the vegetation using the Unreal Engine procedural foliage spawner. So let's start by creating a bush that I would use in Unreal Engine. So we're starting with a blank slate. I already have some leaf materials and bark materials here. Just quickly going to show them. So some of these have multiple little mesh cutouts, leaf meshes. So there's one, there's leaf 2, he also has a few. 3, that's more of a frond, I think. Yeah, that's more of a frond. And then 5. So these are the types of leaves I'll be using for the bush. And I'm also not going to be creating collision in, I'll set up my collision in Unreal Engine if my bush requires collision, and I'm not going to be doing collision response where the bush gets affected by a mesh moving through it. I'm not doing that. But depending on the thickness of your branches, you might want your characters to not be able to move through the branches or that particular bush, but most of the time I want my characters to be able to move through the bushes. Doesn't matter how thick they are. But the branches, if the branches are too thick, then it looks a little bit weird if you can just walk through it. So I'm going to start here with a chunk. Currently my radius here is set to 10, so I usually keep this fairly small for bushes. You could even go smaller, but I do want to have a few bushes and not just one. And what I mean by that, I want to have a few more bushes, not just one, in this little zone here, in this target area. And I'm going to be setting up a zone for that. So I'm going to start by adding a trunk. And I'm going to leave it at absolute. I'm going to leave the number at 1, and I'm going to just bring the length down to, I'm just going to bring it down to about 3. And then I'm going to bring the radius in as well. I'm going to start really, really thin, so let's go for 0.5 0.075 for now, and I don't like that shape, so I'm going to make the shape that it's a bit more. You can see it looks quite jagged, and that's what I want. I don't want to increase the radial segments here, because I'm going to be adding quite a few of these. And since you're not going to really be seeing this too clearly when you start placing leaf meshes on here, I think that's okay. And you could also come in and optimize it a little bit more using the optimization what do you call it, slider value. That will just optimize the mesh even further. This guy here, you can even optimize it. Basically it just becomes a little, it then has less geometry. As you can see, it's got a little bit of jankiness here already, so it gets rid of that because it's dropping the vertices. Let's see. And then you can see the triangle count goes from 40 on optimization 0, and on 1 it goes to 10, which means it's been fully optimized. So for now I'm going to leave optimization at 0. I'm not going to be messing too much with the trunk really. The next thing I want to add here are big branches. And then don't care about that message. Now these can quickly get out of hand as well. You can see it's already on 2,400. Going to change this to absolute. And then I'm going to I'll leave the first at 0 because I wanted to start pretty low down, and the last at 1 because I still want branches pretty high up the parent, high up the root, the trunk. 2,300 is a little bit high. You can bring that down. First I want to bring the length in a little bit. So I need to change the length of the spine, and I'm changing it relative to the parent. Actually, maybe let's leave that for now. Let's just make it a little bit thinner. So I'm just going to be changing the radius. So it was there at 0.3, 0.6, I just halved it to 0.3. Now it's 1.8, which isn't terrible. And then I'm also going to be bringing the radial down. The radial segments. So currently it's at 5 and 2, and bringing it down to 1 and 1. So there it dropped to 800 triangles, which isn't bad from 1.8. That's much better. Haven't played with the optimization yet, and for me that's okay. These are not meant to look pretty. And let's get a material on here quickly. Just going to use the second bark material I have here. See, it automatically applies it on these little branches as well. This is, you can see this is probably more useful for a tree, but we're not going to be even looking at those. And what I do want to do now, I'm going to change something again here. I want to change the radius again, which is the thickness of the, I'm going to put it back at 0.6. Actually make it 1, and then I'm going to bring the radius of the parent down. To about there, 0.035, I guess. And then I'm going to be adding the little branches to the big branches. I could also have added twigs instead of little branches. And you can see they're already sitting at 2.5, which is incredibly high. But we're going to be making some more changes here. I do not like intervals, so I'm not going to be using that. We're going to go for absolute. I've just set that number to 10, and I want them running all the way up and down. But the first thing I would like to do here is bring the radial down as well to 1. And I think that might be all right. I haven't played with the length. I could if I wanted them to be shorter. So maybe bring them in a little bit. Let's make it 0.25 and see what happens. I'm just going to add a leaf mesh. And I'm going to set it to, let's start with, you can see the orientation here is not great, and I think there's too many of them here. So I'll bring these down. Okay, so I can't change those. It's probably because I have too many of these little branches here. Let's bring it down to 5. Going to bring the length back of these big branches. And then I want to fix the orientation of these guys. But I first want to make them a little bit smaller. That's under here, under leaf size. So I'm going to bring this down. Just making them a little bit more smaller, and then I'm going to play with the final adjustments here. See if I can get the orientation here to something that I like. Then I'm going to give it a little bit of fold. A little bit of curl as well, and just a little bit of twist. I'm going to be adding some randomness to that as well, or some variance. And then what I want to do, you could play with these final adjustments a bit more. Then I'm going to add a zone. Then I'm going to reparent the trunk to the zone. And I'm going to change the zone to about, let's say 10, see what happens. 44,000, that's way too many. So all the zone does is just duplicates that and adds variance to it. So let's make it about 5. And then I want to spread them out a little bit better. I'll say 7. Just spread them out a little bit better. So you can see these little branches are really, really, really heavy. 21,000 triangles. Let's see what happens if I optimize them. And then I'm going to optimize the big branches. It's still 23, it's still very, very high. So basically they've went from 31 to 23, which isn't terrible. I could use that. And then you could hit randomize a few times, see different variants of what you have. You could also change the leaf mesh to something else. And then you could, instead of using these little branches, you could use twigs. Twigs are a little bit more efficient, as you can see already. They're set to interval. I'm going to take them back to absolute, put them at 5, and make sure they go from 0 to 1. And now we're at 19, so we can go even lower. So there are different ways to do these, obviously. Let's change the leaf mesh again. Let's go for the sky, and then so he's on 20. But you could maybe increase the size of the leaf. Let's change it to leaf 1. Hit randomize. So you can get quite a few variants pretty quickly. You could also, if you don't want the branches or the leaves to start so close to the bottom, maybe come into your first last and just hit this, maybe 0.2 or something like that. And then to export this, well, let's save this, and then to export it, before I would export this, I'd make sure my level of detail is correct everywhere. So under level of detail, gross scale is alright, but under trunk, I normally like to bring the radials down, the radial segments, for all the branches. And then I leave the gross scale and just see what it does. So we've gone from 19,000 to 3,000. We can bring that down further. By doing the same for the length segments. So as the level of detail increases, the length segments and the radius decreases. And now we're down to 1.9. So that will be the highest level of detail with the lowest amount of polygons. And then there will obviously be a billboard as well. And we'll test that in the next couple of videos. I first want to do a tree as well. So then the next thing I would do is just set up the wind. So in this case I'm choosing bush here, and then these are not large floppy leaves. I'm going for small rusty leaves, and then I usually just tone it down a little bit. So under animation, just bring it down. I find the branches just sway way too much. You could obviously bring the wind down as well, but I don't want the wind to affect the branches that much and the leaves that much. So that could be one that you could export. Then you could come in here and you could maybe say, okay, let's increase the width of the trunk. So we could export this guy. I'm leaving it LODs plus billboard, Atlas non-wrapping, and the size at 2K. And then let's do another one as well. So just disable the wind here for a second. Let's change the leaves to let's use leaf 2, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the trunk radius. Then I'm going to bring these guys down further. So I'm going to change the first to 0. Going to duplicate this leaf mesh and drop it on the big branches as well. I'm going to play with these twigs a little bit. Or maybe even just change the size of these leaves. Do some final adjustments, and then I'll scale these guys and change the radius of these guys a little bit. And maybe increase the length. Of the trunk, just to see what it looks like. So let's change it to 4. And because I have the wind from set previously, it'll still use the same wind settings as earlier. And then obviously you can come in here and play with this as much as you want. Add more branches, or try the difference between, instead of using twigs, use trunk, little branches. Change the settings of the little branches of the twigs. You know, there's a lot to do, but everything you do will have a direct impact on the overall poly count, triangle count. And then what you could always do for something where you would want collision, maybe don't use a zone, and then just add more Let's bring the scale down of these guys so I can see what I'm doing here. I can also hide them so I can see the thing that I don't really like is the scale here. I want the radius of these to be thicker. And I don't want them, I don't like this orientation, so I'm going to change that. And the length. the segment length, spine length is what I'm looking for. We'll just, I think that's a bit extreme. Something like that maybe. And then let's just increase the size again of these guys. You'd really expect me by now to remember where all these are, but yeah, unfortunately the scrolly menu is a bit confusing for me. Length must be here near the beginning. Size, I'm looking for size, not length. Just confusing myself now. Let's try percentage of parent here. See what we get. Yeah, that's something. I probably want to blow this up a little bit. Maybe not that much. And I'd probably want the trunk even a little bit thicker than that. Maybe even have multiple trunks. And then let's see, what does it look like now? You could try with collision. You see what you're creating now is more like a, well, like something out of a scary movie. Let's put the zone back here. And this time I'm just going to set it to 377. That's incredibly high. $50 is also too high. So you'd need to come in here and either bring these down. You can see the twigs are the problem now. There's just way too many of these guys. 26. So just by halving the twigs, we got that down quite a bit. And then I'd increase the size again a little bit here. Let's go for 2, maybe even further. Not that far. So then what I would do is I would import this into Unreal Engine. So let's do that quickly. I'm not going to be using the procedural tool for this, but I am going to import it just to show how I handle collision. So I don't have any collision here. And we just got to double check the level of detail. That's still fine. And then the scale factor, you could change that. So we're going from 26,000 to 1.2 thousand triangles. That's pretty good. So I'm going to just stop the wind there. Saving this. Let's change the wind to, instead of small rusty leaves, let's use large floppy. And just make sure I bring the end of the wind animation strength down for the leaves. Save it, export it. Now I did overwrite my previous brush, but that's just for testing. So using the same again, LODs plus billboard. So my final or my highest level of detail would be a billboard with 36 vertices. And then I've got non-wrapping atlas 2K. All right. Let's bring in those tests. Bushes I just created. Start with the first one. I'm dragging in the ST, and this is what speed tree would have created your bark. You can see it's a packed texture that they use. That's why it looks so speckled and white. That's for the billboard subsurface. And there's the leaf material texture. So let's bring in bush test ST. I'm going to not include collision because I don't care for that one. That one doesn't have collision. I'm including subsurface and vertex processing for the wind, and I'm setting it up for painted foliage. But I'll probably be changing that anyway. Just give it a second to import. And before I drag and drop it into the level, I'm going to first change just one or two things here. I just want to focus on the level of detail properties and make sure I see. Level of detail 1 goes screen size 0.32 must go to 0.1, and the final LOD goes 0.05. I think that's all right. So this is what I was talking about for the billboards. 36. As you can see, it's multi-directional billboards. So there's LOD 0. There LOD 1 kicks in. There's 2, and there's 3. And I'm just going to drag it in here. I already have wind in here. That's why it's swaying in the wind. And let's just quickly do a play and just check something. So obviously there's no collision on these guys. The height is about correct for what I was going for, according to the scale I was using in speed tree. So I'm happy with that. And then let's bring in the other guy. It's better to export them and bring them into separate folders because they can use the same textures and they will override each other. And that's not always what you want. This guy I'm not including collision either. I'm going to be setting it up in Unreal. Right, the first thing I'm going to do is the level of detail settings again. These are just values that I like, that I use, that work well for the level, the world size that I'm going for. So how I'm going to set up collision is pretty simple. I go to LOD 0 because that's where my collision is going to be set up. My LOD for collision is 0. And then what I'm going to be doing is on LOD 0 for the leaf material, I'm going to untick enable collision. And I'm going to leave collision on LOD 0 on the branch material. Then I'm going to go to my collision settings and say use complex as simple, and I'm going to change tick this customized collision here. So use complex as simple. Save that and quickly test it. Just drag it in there. It is bigger than the other one. That's how it was created. And first I want to test the level of detail. There it's swapping out. There it's swapped out again. And that should be the billboard. So let's see if it's got the collision is okay. So I shouldn't be colliding with, I shouldn't be have any collision on the leaves, so I should be intersecting with the leaves like it is. And there is a little bit of a risk when you use this kind of collision is your capsule may get stuck, depending on how the collision was set up. It sometimes can happen, especially if there's very thick foliage. I know it looks maybe it looks a little bit jerky, but it's running at, this is running at 120 FPS, and there's also a lot of other stuff going on back there, but this is not affecting the frame rate. And this should be alright. And there, yeah, got stuck there a little bit. This isn't bad. Should be able to use procedural foliage with that. But I'll be doing a tree first and bringing that in, like similar to those guys over there. And then we'll take a look at the procedural foliage tools. And that is going to wrap it up for this video. Thanks for watching.